Let's listen to the Vice President as he addresses the gathering at the National Economic Forum.
Could create jobs for young Ghanaians. These were private sector operators, overwhelmingly Ghanaian, who addressed their problems in a national context. It became obvious that a general conversation, and not just a dialogue, was needed and would benefit from the inclusion of the social partners, of political organizations, traditional authority, religious leaders, and all facets of the Ghanaian society. Given that we needed to do it as soon as we could, we had a very short period to plan for this forum, especially keeping in mind that in mid-June, the Black Stars will be playing in Brazil, and if they win the trophy in mid-July, that we were therefore constrained in the period in which we would have this meeting, especially when in discussions with the social partners, it was obvious that the period after 17th May would be difficult for them to participate because of travel obligations. Therefore, if the planning is not optimal, please blame me. But forgive the planning team because they've done a marvelous job of addressing the challenges of organization in a very short period of time. There's been discussion about the weaknesses in this organization, about the lack of position papers. That was very deliberate. We decided not to impose the views of government on the forum. A concept paper has been prepared and has been circulated for discussion. But the main purpose of this forum is how to turn the short-term challenges that we face into an opportunity for the future, into an opportunity for achieving the transformation of the economy in the medium term. The short-term measures to restore fiscal balance were first unveiled by the Finance Minister in Parliament on the 1st of April. We have further developed this brief and refined it to address the longer-term opportunities for the economy. At the request of the President, we have circulated the latest version of this homegrown plan to the group of chairpersons and facilitators for this meeting. I know that they will share them with the members of the groups. This confirms that the short-term actions have been developed, and we are determined that these short-term considerations should not undermine considerations for the economy's longer-term prospects. The selection of the participants has also been done carefully for balance. First of all, that there will be no government domination of this forum, that will give an opportunity to people to express their views, and we've especially invited people who have expressed views on the economy in the last couple of months. That these individuals will elaborate these views that they have in discussions with their peers in the groups. To allow for an honest, frank, and undiluted discussion, we have agreed with the chairpersons, the facilitators, and the rapporteurs that they will encourage openness and free expression of views in the groups. The rules for the conduct of a meeting such as this were originally developed in 1927. Referred to as the Chatham House Rule. There's only one rule. It states, and I'll quote the Chatham House Rule: when a meeting or part thereof is held under the Chatham House Rule, participants are free to use the information received, but neither the identity nor the affiliation of the speakers nor that of any participant may be revealed. That's the rule. So we come here and we'll discuss it freely and openly without attribution in the press later. Finally, one innovation of this forum is the decision to create a group that will develop the post-forum action plan. This plan will maintain the momentum of the inclusiveness of this forum in monitoring the progress of the agenda. The responsibility for managing is reserved for government, but the people who have participated in the forum and those who are keenly interested in the progress of the economy who are outside of this room today need to be assured that the commitment is there and that actions will proceed according to the plan that we developed today. Mr. President, I thank you for inviting all of us to join you in this deliberation. And I'm happy to welcome you all. Thank you. To be efficient, there's no MC for this occasion. I'm the MC, so Mr. President, now
Thank you very much. His Excellency, the Vice President of the Republic of Ghana, Her Ladyship, the Chief Justice, His Excellency, the former President, Jerry John Rawlings, Secretary General of the TUC, Senior citizen and renowned economist, Mr. Kwame Pianim, Paramount Chief of Akramu and Queen Mother, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure for me to be here today, but it's an even greater pleasure for me to welcome you here to this gathering. Your presence here is a positive indication of a collective desire to rise above petty politics that so often leaves us feeling divided, so as to contribute to this national dialogue about ways to support the transformation of our economy. Let me first start off by admitting that, like so many good ideas, the ideas for this forum is not a new one. It has been well tested, and it has, in its previous incarnations, proven itself to be a useful tool in planning and policy making. The organization of this forum represents the continuation of a tradition. In 1997, the NDC held the first ever National Economic Forum. In 2001, the MPP successfully replicated it in the form of the National Economic Dialogue. In fact, tomorrow, 14th of May 2014, marks exactly the 13th anniversary of that National Economic Dialogue, for which Ghanaians from diverse backgrounds came together to deliberate on the issues around which we as a nation must consider and find consensus in order to move forward. I'm proud to say that I participated in these earlier economic consultations, first as Deputy Minister of Communications in the then NDC government, and then again as a minority member of Parliament during the then MPP administration. I found those economic dialogues useful in the sense that they allowed a broad spectrum of expertise to be brought to bear on our economic policy formulation. Those forums afforded us the opportunity to hear other voices. Those forums promoted understanding, and though we did not miraculously find unanimity, we were able to forge a consensus behind critical economic policies such as the HIPIC initiative and the poverty reduction and growth strategies, PRGS, of the past decades. As a government, we remain convinced that forums such as this are one of the surest ways to engage the public directly. Forums such as these are one of the surest ways for us as a nation to chart a credible and lasting course for our collective development. My fellow citizens, one of the most dangerous conditions that we as a nation can allow to exist is cynicism. We need to speak in order to be heard. We cannot remain silent on issues that affect our nation. We need to talk with one another rather than at each other. And we need to listen, to be thoughtful in our consideration. We will, of course, have divergent views. And even if we agree on ideas, we may differ in our opinions on how to implement them. But what we do share, what we will always have as our common ground, is our intention. We all want to see Ghana succeed. And to that end, we all want to find a solution that is practical, a solution that is sustainable. It is in the spirit of inclusiveness that we have invited you here today, and that you have also graciously accepted. The circumstances under which this forum is being held make it markedly different than the previous two economic forums. Firstly, Ghana is no longer just another developing country. We are classified as a middle-income country. Truly, we are currently at the lower end of the middle-income spectrum, But we're working hard to consolidate this new status. We're working hard so that soon enough in the foreseeable future, we can attain upper middle income status and shortly thereafter graduate into high income. Secondly, we're in the midst of overcoming various challenges associated with this new national income status, while at the same time striving to develop the institutions that would enable us grow and transform our economy at this time of great volatility and uncertainty in the global economy. Three aspects of these challenges to which I've referred have remained particularly persistent over time. These are, one, the rising debt levels as well as the associated burden of servicing them. Two, the disproportionate amount of government revenue that goes into the payment of salaries and benefits of the public sector, workers and pensioners. And three, the resultant high budget deficits. Every government that Ghana has had over the course of the last decade has had to confront some of these challenges. This alone implies that the challenges are of a complex origin, that they are structural problems that have taken years, in some cases decades, to manifest. It implies that they will require the sort of solutions that we have gathered here today to create. Solutions that have been subjected to the scrutiny of many. Solutions that have been shaped by the voices, the hands, and the visions of many. My fellow Ghanaians, as you approach your discussion, I want you to bear in mind that despite these challenges, we've managed to steer the economy to some of its highest growth rates on record. In 2013, growth was a respectable 7.1%. That same year, the growth rate for the world economy was 3.0%. The growth rate for emerging economies was 4.7%. The growth rate for sub-Saharan Africa average was 4.9%. And the growth rate for the advanced economies averagely was 1.3%. In the medium to long term, we expect to raise this to an average annual growth rate that is above 8%. 2013 growth of 7.1% is impressive against a backdrop of reduced commodity prices for our major exports, gold and cocoa, and an energy crisis that was triggered by a disruption of gas supplies from the West African gas pipeline. As a government, we have done and will continue to do our best to deal with the aforementioned challenges. Some of the measures that we have adopted have imposed unintended hardships, but these hardships are temporary and will not last beyond the short term. Already the positive results are beginning to show in the form of a slowdown in the growth of the wage bill and other indicators against the background of a relatively strong economic growth. The wage bill, excluding arrears, as a share of total tax revenue, declined steadily from 65% at the end of 2012 to 57% at the end of 2013. We are, however, still far from achieving the target spelled out in the West African Monetary Union Convergence criteria of 35%. In August 2013, government hosted a forum for all key stakeholders in Ho in the Volta region to deliberate on strategies for sanitizing the wage bill in order to free resources for other critical investments, such as education, health, and infrastructure. That forum concluded with a communique of 18 very important recommendations. And among those recommendations were the following. Firstly, that to ensure the sustainability of the single spine pay policy, expenditure on personal emoluments should be subject to the overall budgetary constraints of government. This requires that government and organized labor should meet periodically to review the single spine pay policy and its implications for the short, medium, and long-term conditions of government's finances. Secondly, that there is a need to remove wastage and seepage in public pay administration, including having a human capital database linked to the payroll as a way of ensuring that all ghost names are permanently removed from the system. And as I announced on May Day, we are about to embark on a vigorous exercise to discover and remove ghost names and to severely sanction any persons responsible for the insertion of such names. Thirdly, that pay should be linked to work and productivity in the public sector based on target setting and performance. And fourthly, that the relevant agencies should develop a national productivity policy with indicators to guide public sector service pay administration. And fifthly, that subvented agencies that have the capability to exist on their own should be identified and gradually weaned off government subvention. Not long after that forum, the Minister of Employment and Labor Relations put together an advisory committee for the purpose of implementation. I'm happy to announce that the committee has completed the first phase of its work and submitted its report to the Economic Management team, which is currently reviewing the report prior to its submission to Cabinet for further consideration. We have also put in place a new strategy to effectively manage our debts. The goal is to bring the total debt stock and associated servicing to more manageable levels. A key element of this strategy is to separate loans that could be commercially self-financing from those that must be financed from general government revenue. The Ghana Infrastructure and Investment Fund is one of the many instruments we're using to pursue this strategy. Cabinet has already given its blessing to the fund, and it will be presented to Parliament for its review and endorsement when Parliament reconvenes from recess. Another strategy is to implement effective prioritization in the selection of activities or projects to be financed through loans or other forms of credit. Selective projects must be determined to be of prime importance to our nation's advancement and progress. Fellow countrymen and women, since 2013, we have undertaken several measures to restore macroeconomic stability and achieve fiscal consolidation. These measures were scattered in many policy directives, including the budgets of 2013 and 2014. There were some measures also included in the mid-year review of last year's budget, 2013. We realized that in view of the scattered nature of these policies and measures, they did not promote a fair understanding of what we wanted to achieve. In early April this year, therefore, we decided to aggregate all these measures and initiatives into a single document, and we presented it to the representatives of the people of Ghana in Parliament. A more detailed version of the document that was read in Parliament was later presented to the IMF as part of our Article 4 consultations that it undertakes with all its member states. I wish to take this opportunity to state, with great emphasis, that as President, I have not taken any decision to enter our country into an IMF program. What we are concentrating on is the preparation of a homegrown strategy of fiscal consolidation. It is our expectation that both our domestic and international partners will join us in the implementation of this strategy. The briefs that were presented to Parliament and then later to the IMF under our Article 4 consultation represent work in progress and will be finalized through broad consultations, such as the forum we are holding here today. Later today, Minister of Finance, Tekpe, will make a presentation in which I'm sure he will highlight some of these initiatives. It is a tragedy of our very polluted and extremely partisan political environment that such a simple misunderstanding of the relevance of this innocuous document should become the basis for a major political player to stay away from this all-important exercise. For those of you who have shared your views under the umbrella of #BringBackTheCedi, you'll be pleased to hear that the Bank of Ghana initiated a number of measures to stabilize the cedi and foster the overall stability of the financial sector, including controlling inflation and the exchange rates. My fellow Ghanaians, I want you to know that as President, it is with great interest and an open mind that I always listen to your views. I'm aware of the concerns raised in various quarters of the population about the effect of these measures by the central bank. As a government, we believe that the actions taken by the bank were in the best medium to long interests of the country. Still, as promised, a review of those measures was scheduled to take place after 3 months of implementation. And we await the results of that review from the bank. It is our hope that the review addresses the unintended implementational flaws and allays whatever fears or anxieties the public in general and the investor community in particular have expressed about the measures in order to foster the broad macroeconomic stability that we also very much desire. In this year's State of the Nation address, I spoke of the fundamental flaws that we have in the structure of our economy, and I announced some strategies that we will implement to rectify these. Since then, I have established a unit in my office to track the implementation of these measures, and I fully expect to be able to report positively on them in my next State of Nation address to Parliament next year. Right now, we turn our attention to you, those whom we serve, the Ghanaian public, to also hear what you have to say and to explore how that can help advance our collective economic progress. The voices of those that represent businesses, non-governmental organizations, professional associations, academia, traditional leaders, and the many other segments of our total population. Over the course of the next 4 days, we expect to tackle some of the challenges that have defied successive governments over the past decade, be they NDC or NPP. Every government, for example, has succeeded to various degrees in attaining macroeconomic stability. But as of now, none has been successful in finding a way to permanently sustain it. Indeed, every government has left office with a less than desirable macroeconomic situation. And the government that has succeeded it has then had to spend the next 1 or 2 years to bring the economy back from the brink. It is a vicious cycle that we must break. It is clear that we know how to attain it, but now we must learn to sustain it. And I hope that this forum would help us to do precisely that. But as important as the macroeconomy is, we must also look at the bigger economic picture and devote a fair amount of time to the other side of the economy, namely the micro or productive sector, because that is where the action is. We're especially interested in how best the private sector can play its role not just in profit making, but in its contribution to the overall national and human development through job creation and decent work. We need to work with the private sector as partners. Recently, I have held a series of dialogues with representatives of the private sector with a view to understanding how government can assist them to grow their businesses. I have received the minutes of those meetings and have requested that they be sent for validation and commentary by those who were present, so that together we can fashion the next steps forward. But even before the completion of this exercise, government has activated support to the pharmaceutical, poultry, rice, and aquaculture subsectors. Preparations are also well advanced for the launch of a major campaign to promote the consumption of products made in Ghana. We cannot talk about the private sector without addressing the issue of credit, both in terms of access and affordability, especially among small and medium enterprises. Although small and medium enterprises account for over 2/3 of employment in our country, their further expansion and ability to create jobs remains constrained by access to affordable finance, limited markets, and of course, infrastructure bottlenecks, amongst many others. As a government, we have put in place a number of interventions, but we will require more than specific interventions whose effects tend to be limited. What we require is a broadly sound and predictable environment that will allow new businesses to rise and existing ones to thrive. Beyond credit, I would like for you to consider less explored issues such as the logistics subsector, which is critical to our agenda of socio-economic transformation. Logistics, including transportation and storage, forms a core part of supply chain development, which in turn is critical to value chain development. How all these elements come together to create a sound and efficient framework for economic growth and social development is something we are very much interested in exploring during the course of this dialogue. Ladies and gentlemen, countrymen and women, the days of sole proprietorships and sole director companies are over. In this first decade and a half of the 21st century, we are witnessing how the playing field is being taken over by the creative and innovative, and how it is being redefined by cross-fertilization through joint ventures, mergers, takeovers, public listings, and such others. The Ghanaian private sector must be bold and adventurous. Now is the time. We must enter into partnerships, if need be, to raise the capital and acquire whatever expertise we do not possess in order to grow our businesses. We must be willing to take risks. We must be willing to explore options other than those with which we are familiar. My fellow Ghanaians, we look to you to work with us in the spirit of nationalism and patriotism to collectively identify some of these options. We look to you in carrying out your deliberations to take a critical and deeper look at the statistics with which we have become increasingly familiar, because at first glance they may sometimes only tell a portion of a more complex story. And allow me to share this example with you. In recent times, thanks to the tireless efforts of our farmers, we've been fortunate enough to have cocoa production rise steadily to record levels, averaging at least 850,000 tons a year. This is nearly 40% higher than the 581,000 tons we produced in 1965, which at the time was considered a record. However, in per capita terms, cocoa output in recent times, the 850,000, amounts to only 33 kilos per capita per Ghanaian, compared to 75 kilos per capita per Ghanaian in 1965 with the 581 million tons. If you therefore concentrated on the statistics only in respect of the tonnage, you would see a dramatic increase in production. But if you look per capita, our production per capita is lower because of increased population. Indeed, since 1984, real cocoa prices on the world market have been declining by an average of over 1% per year. If ever there were a case for us to diversify our economy and add more value to our primary commodities, this should be it. But let me state clearly, and to assure our farmers in particular, that diversification does not mean that we will leave them and others behind. In fact, diversification and industrialization offer us a unique opportunity to make optimal use of primary commodities like cocoa. This will not only raise the incomes of farmers, but will also create employment, and by so doing help raise the national income and therefore reduce poverty. But in order to attain and sustain these goals, we need a roadmap. My fellow citizens, your presence here today will enable us to work together towards the creation of such a map. As I've already noted, we have begun a lot of work in this regard, but we believe that this is the time for us to create a platform that is non-partisan. It is time for us as a government to create a specific space within which the people of Ghana can address us and address each other. It is a space, a platform for you to share your views, experiences, and your aspirations on the direction of economic policy. This is the time for us to come together. It's a time for us to work together. These are challenging times, but we have gone through times that were even more challenging than these, and we have survived. These are also promising times, and I have every faith that together we will emerge from these challenges more victorious. We will emerge from these challenges stronger and better. We will attain the success that we seek, and in so doing, we will find the means to sustain that success. And I believe that Ghana will be a more prosperous nation. My fellow citizens, I thank you again for your presence and your participation, and I wish you fruitful deliberation, and I look forward to meeting you again at the end of this conference. May God bless you, and may God bless our homeland, Ghana.
Thank you. As part of the opening ceremony, I'll invite the representative of the African Development Bank and the Africa Center for Economic Transformation to join us on the podium to position Ghana within the global economy. And I'm happy to invite the representative of the Chief Economist and Vice President of the African Development Bank to make a presentation. Thank you.
Your Excellency, the Vice President of the Republic of Ghana, Your Ladyship, distinguished members of the High Table, Your Excellency, the former President of the Republic of Ghana, Mr. Rawlings, and all protocol observed, good morning. On behalf of the African Development Bank President, Dr. Kaberuka, and the Board of Directors, it is a great pleasure for me and a privilege to participate in the Ghana National Economic Forum on the theme Building a National Consensus for Economic and Social Transformation, and to address this August gathering. I'm sure you would have noticed by now that I am not Professor Mtuli Nkumbe, the Vice President and Chief Economist of the bank. Regrettably, he was engaged and could not make the trip to Accra, and has asked me to kindly represent him, and I will try to do my best in that regard. He asked me, and I will speak on his behalf, of course, to thank you, Your Excellency, Mr. Vice President, for the very warm welcome that he received during his recent visit in Ghana, and the great pleasure that he had in exchanging with you and with several members of the government and various stakeholders on the state of the economy, and to see how we could, of course, advise and assist. I would like to congratulate the government of Ghana for convening this very important forum at a time when there is evidence that strong headline economic growth is just not enough. On the continent, more than 40 million youth are entering the labor market every year and they cannot find decent jobs. The reason for that is straightforward. Yes, economic growth is strong, but economic transformation has not taken place. It remains a challenge. And therefore, we need deliberate policies to reduce inequalities, to promote inclusion, and to create jobs. And this work must be done now more than ever. And therefore, a renewed focus on people expectation is very timely. Africa needs, as I said, decent jobs. They need a living wage. They need access to basic and affordable services. They also look forward to well-functioning institutions and accountable government. Today I've been asked to share with you our views on the recent economic development on the continent and the Africa Transformation Agenda as a context to the discussion that you will have over the next 4 days. Your Excellency, in 2013, Africa's economic growth slowed, while fiscal and external balances worsened due primarily to global headwinds. The adverse external environment included tightening global financing conditions and rising financing costs, less dynamic emerging markets that had driven the growth while more developed economies had slowed over the past few years, and less favorable commodity prices. In sub-Saharan Africa, His Excellency the Vice President, His Excellency the President, did indicate that the growth rate remained unchanged at 4.9% in 2013. And indeed, we had a lot of political unrest, disruption in oil production in several parts, the North, the West, and the Central Africa. And this slowed really the Africa oil economy, oil exporting economies from 9% in 2012 to just 3.4% in 2013. And we would like to note that although 3 economies had growth contraction in 2013, mostly due to various forms of instability, more than 40% of African countries recorded growth rates of 5% and above. And I believe Ghana did very well with 7.1% in 2013. 7.1% in 2013. Growth prospects remain very positive in Africa. GDP is expected to reach about 4.8% in 2014 and about 5.8% in 2015. And the drivers of this growth are really going to be mostly domestic demand, relatively resilient foreign direct investment inflows, and we hope improvement in the business environment and easing infrastructural constraints as a result of these investments that will help in this area. But we also see and we believe that the continent remains very vulnerable to key external risks. And these include, of course, the weakening, as I mentioned earlier on, in emerging market economies, and sharper than projected declines in commodity prices. Domestic risk to growth outlook relates to the inability to contain macroeconomic imbalances in some countries. And I would like to, I think, His Excellency the President did mention that it was a challenge in Ghana. But also we are concerned about developing conflict in a number of pockets on the continent, security concerns in some of the neighboring countries, even of Ghana, and weather shocks and the impact on local harvest and food prices. And going to another criteria that we are looking very carefully when we want to assess the state of the economy, I would like to move now to average fiscal deficit. Average fiscal deficit as a percentage of GDP for the whole continent rose from 3.2% in 2012 to about 4.1% in 2013. And we had about almost 30% of the countries which recorded deficit of 5% or above. And here, for record, I believe Ghana was at about 10.8 or 10.9%. Most countries' external debt remain relatively manageable, and a few countries are beginning to have high debt ratios. Most countries are probably still around 25–30% of external debt to GDP. And this is a development that we find very worrisome. And we believe that this calls for fiscal consolidation and increased domestic revenue mobilization to really rebuild the buffers and to ensure that the sustainability of the public finances are preserved over the medium term. Current account deficit also, unfortunately, were in double digit, mostly double digit relative to GDP. And this is really as a result of increased investment in export-oriented activities and infrastructure. We had good development in terms of the FDI inflows to Africa. So the good trend that we had started seeing in 2012 was confirmed in 2013, and we observed a rise of about 5.6% of FDI inflows to Africa. And a few countries, South Africa, Mozambique, and Nigeria, were able to take the lion's share of these FDI inflows. Again, in terms of remittances, we had also a very good performance. And these are elements that are really giving us some hope because, yes, some of these remittances, some of these FDIs are coming from countries that we believe are still only gradually recovering from the crisis that we have observed since 2008 and 2009. So these are reasons for us to have hope that the outlook that we have for the continent is indeed firmly grounded. In terms of official development assistance disbursement to Africa, they are estimated to have increased by about 5.5% in 2013. But on this front, unfortunately, the outlook is not very positive. And we believe that the global country programmable aid is expected to stagnate in the period 2014 to 2016, according to the OECD. I would like to touch maybe briefly on two elements. One has to do with the impact of the BRIC country on the African growth. And the fact that, for example, China has been the largest single trading partner for Africa and a key investor and provider of aid. And we see these rising linkages, the various roles that a country like China has played, as supporting growth, but as also exposing African countries to potentially negative spillover if China growth slows down, for example, or the composition of the demand changes. And we have done some calculation at the bank, and we find that a 1% drop in China's economic growth is likely to induce about 0.1% growth, drop in the total African GDP growth. The impact on China is probably not as important as the impact that we could have on commodity prices and the long-term structural decline in commodity prices that we are observing. And this, for us, is a big threat to African economic outlook in 2014 and 15. And same thing, we are very concerned about the quantitative easing tapering, and the impact of such development in the US is that we are seeing very tight monetary conditions. It's more and more difficult to fund Africa's development by recurring to the external investors to the continent. Currency depreciation, briefly, in the vulnerable economies, this is where the sharpest impact has been seen in terms of the quantitative easing. For example, the South African rand fell more than 7.5% just in January 2014, and yet the Reserve Bank of South Africa had, for the first time in 6 years, raised interest rates. And we believe that sub-Saharan Africa financial sector, which is not as integrated to the rest of the economy as South Africa, is still to some extent shielding African economies. Nevertheless, several sub-Saharan African currencies lost an average of 4.6% compared to the US dollar since 1st of May 2013, when the Federal Reserve announced that it will begin to it will stop the quantitative easing that it had been in effect for the past few years. Sadly, we know the state of the Ghana CD, and the decline was probably more pronounced in Ghana in terms of currency depreciation. Your Excellency, we view some of these developments as calling for really critical policy implication. One is that policy response to risk of long-term structural decline in commodity prices will need to focus on structural reforms, focusing on increased value addition in the primary commodity sector. I believe we heard His Excellency the President speak on this topic very eloquently, and diversification into higher productivity sectors, especially the manufacturing and modern services, as a way to hedge against this structural decline in commodity prices. Of course, we still believe that domestic resource mobilization, domestic revenue mobilization is a key factor, improving public financial management, enhancing regional integration through intra-Africa trade, and developing non-traditional sources of finance and markets will be very important. And I think that as you reflect over the next 4 days, that could be some pointers that we could look at. And are we doing sufficiently in terms of regional integration? How can we better harness the potential that exists? Similarly, it is important to guard against disorderly exchange rate adjustment. We believe that exchange rate should be allowed to respond to changing fundamentals. But there is a need also to guard against disorderly adjustment. Some intervention to smooth the market volatility will be needed with adequate reserve. But if a country does not have adequate reserve, then market fundamentals should probably be authorized to determine the appropriate value of the local currency. International and regional policy coordination and cooperation will also be needed. And we also have looked at central banks and capital outflows. And we believe that the risk from a tightening of the financing condition worldwide could lead to a rise in risk premium for African countries and lead to lower foreign direct investment. And therefore, central banks will have to rely on their credibility and their very effective communication to convince markets of their focus on stable inflation and orderly markets, with a monetary policy response that is appropriate to the cyclical position. And we believe that that will help to mitigate the flight to quality and the associated increases in risk premium. Some countries will be able to access central bank foreign exchange swap line to help cope with the market turbulence, but others do not have this luxury. Your Excellency, this is by way of reviewing the overall economic environment in 2013, and of course trying to draw some lines with the situation in Ghana, but I know that we will hear extensively on the situation in Ghana, so I purposely did not focus on that. But maybe by way of conclusion, I would like to say a few words on the theme of the conference, which is economic and social transformation. And we believe that Africa and its people, including the people of Ghana, I think our objective is to really be a pole for global growth in the next decade. Africa is transforming, but not sufficiently. I mean, the pace of transformation must be accelerated. And for us, we would like to maybe suggest that structural transformation may need to take a closer look at the following topic. And I know that many of these topics are already covered in the sub-themes of the conference. One is, of course, the sound macroeconomic environment, including adequate fiscal policies. The second aspect that is important is to grow the middle class. I know there's a big debate about whether there is truly a middle class in Africa. We at the African Development Bank believe that there is a middle class, and it is actually growing, and it is going to be a significant driver in the coming years. The third point, investing in transformational and inclusive infrastructure. We know that we need to invest probably at least 10% of the GDP each year to come up with new infrastructure, and we are not even talking about maintenance of the existing infrastructure. So we have to be a bit smarter in the way we choose these infrastructure projects, and they have to meet those two tests, transformational and inclusive. We believe that will certainly be a good criteria when we select some of the projects. Private sector development and entrepreneurship, yes, it is part of the agenda, this topic that will be discussed, but we would like to, of course, focus on the small and medium-sized enterprises, their capacity to create jobs. Let us truly help those SMEs, not those big companies that, yes, they need help, but those SMEs even need it the most. Harnessing the natural resource boom is a critical game changer for us. Domestic resource mobilization, we need to be a little bit more creative as well. Harnessing the full potential of ICT and mobile telephony, transforming Africa's agriculture, diversification, processing, and beneficiation. Again, property rights, security of ownership is again another area that we need to focus on. So I would like to close, Mr. Vice President, Your Excellency, by borrowing from President Kaberuka's own words to discuss the issue of how is Africa going to do all this? Where will the funding come from? And we would like to say that it is evident that the effort will be primarily internal, with international community able to support that internal effort. Today, we have some figures that seem to indicate that various forms of domestic finance account for more than 3/4 of all expenditures. International cooperation has played a major role in the past 50 years to finance Africa's development. It is very much needed, it is very appreciated, especially by countries which have very limited resources. But for now, I think it's also fair to say that it has been curtailed both by the global recession, budget cuts in many countries, and probably also a diminishing constituency for aid. So we must do more. From domestic resource mobilization, we must spend wisely. We must be able to eliminate all the waste and all the leakages, and we must be able to be more effective in natural resource management and in leveraging the capital market. The report by the Africa Progress Report under Kofi Annan highlighted very clearly how Africa is being deprived of revenues from our natural resources, and this will require our attention. We believe that those mining companies can prosper in Africa, but we also would like them to pay what Africa deserves. And at the moment, the capital markets are awash with liquidity, interest rates are at historical low, but investors are increasingly discriminating between the various credits based on the fundamentals. So, Mr. Vice President, Your Excellency, I would like to reiterate again how happy we are to have been invited and to be part of this event. And we would like to wish you very fruitful deliberation while we are affirming again that the African Development Bank Group remains available and to stand alongside with you and other regional member countries as we embark into this exciting venture, transforming truly Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary-Law. Our next final speaker for the opening ceremony is the former Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa, Dr. K.Y. Amwakun. Dr. Amwakun has retired from the ECA but has set up and is president of the Africa Center for Economic Transformation. He's one of our own, and we thought that if anybody is going to tell us the hard truth, it could only come from a Ghanaian citizen. So, Dr. Amwakun.
I agree on a framework for reform, a plan to put their country back on track. I had the opportunity to participate behind the scenes in those deliberations. And what I remember was a diverse cross-section of country stakeholders coming together for the greater good. The mining unions did not strike. The state agreed to liberalize prices, reduce subsidies, carry out interest and exchange rate reforms. The private sector became hopeful again. My point is that I witnessed every major player who had a say in the country's economic future unite in the face of crisis, sacrifice their self-interest, and make the tough decisions. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. We all know why we are here today. Ghana, as the President said, faces economic difficulties, fueled by macroeconomic imbalances that pose serious implications for sustained growth. Fiscal deficits remain high, rising public debt, energy subsidies, and high public sector wage growth threaten macroeconomic stability. Inflation has jumped into double digits, as have interest rates, pushing up the cost of credit. Some are even forecasting growth to drop below 4% within a few years if this trend continues. The country's fiscal imbalances, if maintained at current trends, is expected to result in an untenable domestic debt position in as few as 3 years. These numbers and trends are disturbing, and they require an aggressive response. On this, we all agree. The government recently announced new measures intended to reduce public sector expenditure and improve revenue generation, boosting investment in agriculture, culture, and increasing value-added tax, while also broadening its coverage. We should very heartily welcome these measures and build upon them. After all, any nation in economic distress must take the necessary steps to turn things around. But Ghana is greater than that. We are not just any nation. We are the first country south of the Sahara to reclaim our rights to sovereignty. We are the ones looked upon for hope as an example of independence to come. We are a nation visited by American presidents and English monarchs because, as Barack Obama said, we show the world a face of Africa that is often overlooked. We are a nation of stable democracy, of peaceful transfers of power, of adherence to the rule of law, of respect for civil society, and of impressive rates of economic growth. This is the legacy that is on the line. This is why we are here today. To not just turn things around, but also to aim higher. The economic difficulties we face could seriously undermine the achievements Ghana has had by weakening the strong society. But they also threaten to undermine all that Ghana is still capable of achieving. Undoing past gains is bad enough. Sabotaging future potential is even worse, because Ghana's outlook remains very bright. We are blessed with a youthful population and growing labor force, and with abundant land and agricultural resources, many of which provide us with powerful comparative advantages in exports. We are blessed with natural beauty that drives tourism and the recreative leisure travel industry. We are blessed with highly sought-after natural resources, oil, gas, and valuable minerals. We were the Gold Coast for a reason. We are blessed to be Ghana. We are a nation with a track record of achievement, but also of vast potential. The challenge before us is to get to the place where we are able to move to more fully realize that vast potential. This, my dear countrywomen and men, is what brings us here today. We know that Ghana has been growing. That's the good news. But we also know that that is not enough. The economy grew from its average 5.3% in the 2000s to 14% in 2011. But extremely favorable commodity prices and lately oil underwrote much of that growth. During the peak year of 2011, for instance, our manufacturing sector contributed only 7% to GDP. The real long-term challenge for Ghana, as with most resource-rich African nations that have experienced growth of unequal or unstable nature, is to figure out what is necessary to maximize the value of its resources, stabilize and diversify its growth, and ensure sustainable and equitable development. I founded the African Center for Economic Transformation, as the Vice President said, or ACET, in Accra in 2008, to help African governments do just that. Our goal is to become Africa's unmatched resource for the analysis, advice, and advocacy necessary for countries to transform their economies, not just grow them. What does that mean in practical terms? It means that governments, to ensure that growth is sustainable and improves the lives of the many, need to address their structural weaknesses and deliberately and vigorously promote economic transformation. We call that growth with depth. D-E-P-T-H. The D stands for diversification of production and exports. The E stands for export competitiveness. P for productivity gains. And T for technological advance. And H for human well-being, all brought about by expanding formal employment and raising incomes. This is also the recipe for the future of sound African economies. This is our blueprint for a country like Ghana to realize its vast potential. Earlier this year, we released our flagship African Transformation Report. The report is the culmination of a 3-year research program that looks systematically at transformation as a broad framework for balanced and sustainable growth. It also puts our blueprint, growth with depth, in empirical terms via the African Transformation Index, a key feature of the report. The index provides a comparative baseline to measure the performance and progress of African countries on the 5 death attributes. Let me briefly share where Ghana stands. But first, a warning. The news is not very good. We studied 21 African countries. According to the overall Composite Transformation Index, Ghana ranked 16th. This is further evidence that rapid economic growth like Ghana has been experienced since 2000 does not necessarily translate into structural transformation. Even worse, there's a notable negative trend. We calculated scores for every country going as far back to 2000. That year, Ghana ranked 9th on the overall transformation index. Ghana's plunge from 9th to 16th was the largest drop since 2000 among the 21 countries. 2000, when Ghana ranked 2nd overall, we see another troubling sign of decline. On productivity, we ranked 12th. On technology, we ranked 20th. On human well-being, we rank 8th. This otherwise solid ranking is also tempered by troubled signs underlying data. However, for instance, less than 1/4 of Ghana's labor force is in formal employment. I'm not trying to be an alarmist. This is the reality before us. And let me make a quick point. The transformation report from which these numbers derive is not just another report. It is the first of its kind. It is comprehensive. It is objective and data-driven. It is a benchmark for nations to measure their progress. Those are other people's words, not mine. And many have endorsed it. Jim Wolfenson, the former president of the World Bank, called it an extraordinary report. The Economist praised it for being grounded in reality. The New African magazine wrote, the report could readily be used to shape the strategies of individual African nations. And my good friend and brother, Bernard Kaberuka, wrote to me yesterday saying it is insightful, useful, and timely. And President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf said the report is a proof that ASSET is an institution that gives new meaning to African ownership of African destiny. Of course, I'm proud of it, and I stand behind it. But the point is that its findings are meaningful and have been strongly supported. It is not just another report. It is a reflection of economic reality, and some have called it a game changer. It is a wake-up call for Ghana. So, that brings us to the big question. If we are doing this poorly, how do we fix it? What do? We take one step at a time, and we follow the signs in front of us. We know in general what it takes to transform. Other countries have done it, most notably in Asia. As part of the ASSET study, we considered those countries, but we also looked at countries in Africa that have already started down the path successfully, such as Mauritius and South Africa. We found many lessons from which to draw, but I want to share the 5 most important lessons for Ghana. This is how we get on track. First, we must have a plan. A united vision developed through broad consultations with the private sector, civil society, think tanks, and forums like this one is imperative to guide economic transformation. Second, we must be consistent. Transformation is a long-term process. It takes 20 to 30 years. Frequent shifts in strategy or abrupt changes impede progress. The vision needs to transcend politics. Third, we must work together. Active collaboration between the state and the private sector is at the core of economic transformation. And that means regular contacts between the government and business interests and shared goals. Fourth, we must coordinate closely. Successful transformation strategies cut across ministries, agencies, and organizations. There is a demonstrated need for entrusting coordination oversight to a single individual or an agency like the NDPC that can serve as a traffic cop. Working together is one thing. Working productively together is the key. Fifth, we must focus on core state functions. Successful transformation demands that the most important state functions be performed well, particularly sound macroeconomic management. In short, the state must manage the economy to ensure businesses to flourish. Transformation is not driven just by the state or just by the private sector. It is a combination of both. Now let me back up a moment, because we shouldn't put the cart before the horse. The fifth lesson leads me to the most important point I'll make today. I just described the way Ghana can get on track for transformation, which is a necessity, but we can't lose sight of the fundamentals. Those core state functions that enable a vision of transformation to take root. Above all else, that means getting our macroeconomic policies back on track, as the government is trying, and fostering an environment that is conducive to economic activities and entrepreneurship, particularly by private businesses. According to the findings of the transformation report, this requires policy actions on many fronts. Specifically, pursuing fiscal and monetary policies ensuring that their impacts on inflation, interest rate, and exchange rate promote across-the-board growth in GDP, jobs, and exports. Planning and managing public spending so that a healthy balance between short-run consumption and long-run investment is a priority. Placing stronger oversight on ports and customs, but with more simplified procedures to move goods in and out of the country more efficiently. Making public procurement deliver value for money by reducing corruption, which not only wastes precious financial resources, but undermines trust and public confidence. And finally, streamlining regulation to encourage entrepreneurship, innovation, and investment. The only losers will be corrupt officials. Given our current situation, let me very briefly mention some of the actions that I'm sure the forum will be discussing. And I'm sure the finance minister will probably go into greater detail. First, we must get government expenditures under control and avoid over-reliance on tax increases. Second, we must ensure value for money in procurement through more transparent practices. Third, we must establish or strengthen formal institutions or processes, including improved governance of our state-owned enterprises. Fourth, we must have a clear export strategy that involves identifying low-hanging fruits and removing the policy, regulatory, and other bottlenecks that impede their expansion. And we must proactively provide government support to such products and sectors while avoiding cronyism and patronage. Once we get the fundamentals in order, then Ghana will have ample pathways to transformation. As I previously mentioned, we are a country blessed with abundant resources, be they natural, land, or labor. These resources and our own proud record of achievement offer us exciting prospects for transformation. For example, cocoa offers opportunities to increase export earnings by improving yields and moving up the value chain into intermediate processing. Since Ghana is the world's largest producer of raw beans, we should be reaping more of the profits. With more than 1 million hectares of land suitable for palm oil, Ghana has great potential to increase its manufactures and exports to regional and global markets. Ghana's horticultural exports, led by pineapples, yams, and bananas, can extend to mangoes, citrus fruits, melons, and avocados. Rice, sugar, meat, and poultry all offer increased processing potential for domestic and regional markets. On extractives, our extractive industry gives us opportunity to harness natural gas to generate power, to develop ancillary oil and gas services, and to produce petrochemicals. And perhaps most promising of all is light manufacturing, which has yet to take off in sub-Saharan Africa. Light manufacturing has been a crucial stepping stone for successful developing countries, particularly in Asia, and most notably in China. Now an economic powerhouse, China is looking to Africa to relocate manufacturing jobs. By the end of 2012, China's investment in Africa's manufacturing industry had reached $3.4 billion. Other African countries, such as Ethiopia and Rwanda, and also Liberia now, are leading the way by targeting specific sectors as a source of foreign investment in light manufacturing industry and jobs. Ghana must get on board this train. These are just a few of the ways that Ghana can excel. This is just some of the potential that transformation can offer us. And this is the opportunity that we have before us at this forum to begin to make transformation vision a reality. But it takes courage, commitment, a willingness to work together. It takes compromise, and it takes sacrifice. I began this discussion by recalling my witness to Zambia's National Economic Forum 30 years ago, when the country's political and economic leadership came together and made the hard choices for the greater good. What I didn't say, and what many of you probably know, is that within a few years, Zambia abandoned the pro-growth strategy that the government, private sector, and labor leaders agreed to. Amid painful inflation and other corrective shocks, political pressures became too much. The political will for structural change dissipated, and Zambia fell into an economic abyss for 2 decades. Zambia's experience provides us with a cautionary tale, but I am an undying optimist at heart. So let me conclude on a more hopeful note. In the 1980s and the early 90s, Brazil suffered from crippling stagnation and hyperinflation. As the former head of Brazil's central bank put it, imagine that the cost of your food and clothing went up 40% every month. It seemed outlandish to imagine Brazil was anywhere near economic stability, much less growth. In 1995, Fernando Cardoso was elected president, and his government, an alliance of his own moderate party and 2 right-wing parties, embarked on a decade of structural transformation, structural reforms, and austerity measures. These moves put Brazil on a new path, and by the mid-2000s, the country was seen as an emerging economic power. Cardoso's predecessor, Lula da Silva, chose to maintain the core policies of his predecessor. That's why Lula left his background. As a result of this strategic stability, Brazil continued to increase GDP per capita, grow production for exports, boost employment, and even expand social welfare. Brazil became one of the new century's great economic turnarounds. It also shows how a long-term strategy of transformation can benefit a country economically if it is supported by national leaders across party lines. A successful transformation strategy is a shared vision, an ongoing commitment to progress that acts as a compact between leaders and the citizens they are elected to look out for. We have many reasons to be proud of our democracy, of our democratic reforms. But in our multi-party environment that we have today, there is often a surplus of politics and a deficit of ideas. Let us ensure that our conversation to rebuild Ghana's future does not fall victim to that. The stakes are too high. Because at its core, at its heart, economic transformation is about people, their jobs, their prosperity, their livelihood, their contributions to Ghana's ongoing legacy. Successful transformation, as I've said, is a 20 to 30-year process. If we imagine a transformed Ghana in 2040, For example, we imagine a nation which today's young people are the adults, many in the prime of their working lives. But among today's youth, a large majority is either unemployed or eking out a living in the informal sector. They are the reason to fix our fundamentals. They are the reason to transform our economy. As New York Times Friedman wrote, countries that don't plan for the future tend not to do well there. If you want to do well tomorrow, you have to start planning today. I hope in the next few days, we can use this economic forum to usher in an era of stable, shared, and sustainable growth. We are not just any nation. We are Ghana. Thank you very much for your attention.